Hey there, it's Vicki here with Scrapbook.com for American Crafts, and I am going to take all of the awesome techniques that I have shared in past videos using art crayons and my glazes and stencils and actually make a start to finish project. So let's take all of those magic little golden nuggets and make something. I think that's going to be fun. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. So I'm going to start with the background. Always, it seems to be my go-to product is the foundations paper. So you want to grab a sheet of foundations paper or whatever you have that's equivalent to heavyweight paper. And that's going to be the base of the layout. You can trim the top off right now, or you'll find as I'm working, I just get into it. And then when I'm ready to trim the paper, either down to size, if I'm going to mat it on a pattern paper, or if I'm going to use this as a full background, I'll deal with that later. We don't need to worry about that now. What you're going to need for this is art crayons. So your art crayon choices. You need to have your delivery system, which is a sheet of acetate. For me, I have a paintbrush, I have clean water, and I have all these ideas swirling in my head. I'm also going to use stencil and a stencil brush because this really is kind of basics of art crayon. So I want you to have a really simple application of the techniques so you can feel that you can be successful with what I'm teaching you. So let's get started. I'm going to start on this background. Here's the layout we're going to make. Maybe you'd like to see that. So this is a layout of my son, and it has some simple stamping techniques, some art crayon application. What I love is with mixed media that I can customize backgrounds. And I don't have to have a whole huge stack of different pattern papers to use. I can make my own to suit whatever I would like to create. So for this background, we're going to do some dripping techniques where we put some drops of paint on the background and kind of swirl it around. And then we're going to layer some dry art crayon on there, and we're going to stamp, because I always find that adding that black layer really kind of grounds the whole background and creates lots of magic. So let's get started. I am going to take that sheet of acrylic and I'm going to put some yellow art crayon in the center. So why I use this one, I cut down to a 6x12 piece, is it acts like handles. I can pick it up, flip it, and do this technique. So to get started, just add your color. Don't press too hard. It's a big background, so I want a decent amount. You don't need a ton of art crayon here. Less is more. You can always add, but you can't take away. So you're better off to build in layers and start light and then go from there. So I'm going to blend that color out. I also want a heat gun handy. So if you have a heat gun, it's going to be your friend for some of these techniques, but you'll find we're only using it a little bit. If you have time on your hand and you can let it dry on your own, it's probably not a bad idea. For this technique, you want this watered down art crayon to be very fluid. So when you go to apply it, because I'm going to do it in drips, it will drip off your page. So I'm doing these kind of drips. I can then go in. What's nice, when you look at this, I had a blank palette, this white sheet, and sometimes it's scary. Where do you start? By doing this and laying the background, by just dripping the paint on, it kind of sets me up for where my pigment and my technique is going to go. You have the choice of then just going in and kind of doing this kind of tapping, where I'm spreading some of the pigment. I'm not brushing it around. I'm just tapping into it. You can add a little bit more water so you have lighter and darker areas of yellow. But why I like this is I can spread that pigment around, but it isn't in a formal brush stroke. I can also pick that up, get my mess out of the way, and I can move it around just by letting it flow around on the page. Okay, the other thing I can do is also take that pigment when there's hardly anything on here and just move it around on that page. So this just kind of gives some place to start. Okay, gives you some place to start. When you get those lines, because the plastic, when you go to pull it, I don't know what the physics term is, but it sucks it right into the middle of the plastic. You just might want to take your brush again and just move it around, because we can do tapping. Tapping's easy, right? And that just kind of gives you the background. Now, if you go in to heat set this, if you don't have the patience to either just leave this to dry and you want to get right into the next step, you can use your heat gun. But I want you to remember, when you're heating, you're not baking it. These aren't cookies we're making. It's a mixed media background. And here's the biggest, another golden nugget, a Vicki golden nugget. If you overheat the paper, it will buckle. So you're going to change the memory of the fibers, because paper is woven of fibers, right? So when you have those fibers, they're like this. If I overheat it and the heat expands those fibers, it will permanently make that page buckle. So when I'm heating, it's only heating to damp, not to dry. So I hope that makes sense to you. When you go in, just give it a little bit of heat, and watching you don't move the pattern around. You can also have a paper towel handy. So when you get almost done, where there's just a few pools of paint, you can go in and then just kind of suck it up with a paper towel. So here, see, you have these little pooled areas. If I go in, moving my paper towel around, okay? Don't just, if you leave that pigment on there and you go to place it again, you could deposit it again. So just go in and pick up the excess. I'm just doing that so I can add another layer of yellow on before I move on to the next step. I don't need to clean my sheet. I can just put a little bit more pigment on, and now I'm going to put in a couple of drips. So I'm going to load up a paintbrush and I'm just going to tap it on. I could also, you know, the first step we did where we did some drips, let's do a couple of those too. And here is a little tip. The higher you lift this paper, or if you add a little bit of pressure when you put the taps down, you get little splats, which are kind of fun. So if I just do that, that's how you get those magic. If you look at a lot of mixed media artists, when they have those fun backgrounds, load up a brush, tap it on. And with the magic of video, I prepped another page, and we're going to move on to the next step. So I'm going to set that one aside to dry. So now that the background is magically dry, I'm going to go in and do some application of Art Crayon Dry with a stencil and stencil brush. So I love a stencil that is simple and linear like this when I'm trying to build interest with my layers. Putting down that first layer of yellow is like color placement and pulling in like a main color that's going to contrast with my photo. And then I can go in with my stencil and some dry art crayon and start to create these fun layers. And this layout, I've been listening to what you've been asking for, is more of a simple, quick, and easy application of mixed media backgrounds. So if it's your first time trying something like this, it's not too intimidating once I break down these steps. So I know when we're done, I know you're going to give this one a try. So when you take your stencil, I'm going to position it and I'm going to kind of make that pattern. So you see the back, my thoughts here for this layout is it's going to go kind of wider at the top, trickle to the middle, and then wider at the bottom. And I just find that linear visual interest through the center of the layout is super helpful in building a placement for your photo. So with that one, I'm going to take a clean stencil brush. So it's stained, but it's okay. I've cleaned this beforehand. And then I'm going to take my little sheet of acrylic. You can use the one that comes with the stencil brush, but I have this one handy. And you're going to load your next color on. And in that layout, I use green. I thought it would work really well with the yellow. So I'm just going to go in with this kind of limey Art Crayon color. And I'm going to put it down. And I'm going to actually blend some of this green in there with it. So what's nice with these, I can kind of customize and make my own color just by blending the two colors together. And even though it's dry, it's not a wet application, it will still work beautifully. So then just take your stencil brush and in a circular motion, load the brush. My brush is a little damp, which is magic. When you start working with this, I say this is a dry technique because the first time you try it, I want you to try the stencil brush completely dry with the Art Crayon. Here's the thing, Art Crayon is always open. If I wet it, I'm going to move it around. It will never set. So the magic with using it with a stencil brush, if my brush is slightly, listen to what I'm saying, slightly damp, this makes the pigment go way further. But if you're just new to this and you wet that brush, I want you to practice on something other than a finished project, because if the brush is really wet, it's going to bleed underneath the stencil. That's a fun technique in its own, but here again, the learning is going to come through the discoveries and the practicing. Learning and discovery is in the practice and play. So my brush is a little wet, so when I go on here, if you're using it with a completely dry brush, the pigment will not move as easily as mine does. So I'm going to position my stencil, and remember, I'm going to move it into 2 spots. And what's nice with a pattern like this is it's not exact. So I can move it to make it wider, even though it isn't a 12 by 12 size, and I can get an amazing technique. So in a circular motion, and I'm not pressing very hard at all, I'm going in and I'm adding some green. Look at that magic. I'm going to move this over, and I'm okay if it's not exactly lined up, and making it a little wider at the top. And I can even start bringing it down a little bit. So it's like it's going through a funnel. So down in the center part, I'm just going to make it really thin. And again, not making a whole rectangle of pattern because that makes it not as interesting. And normally, if this stencil brush would have been completely dry, I wouldn't get this much pigment off. So there's another lesson. If the brush is slightly damp, you will get tons of pigment. If it's too wet, it will bleed underneath the stencil. Let's see how far we can go with this. I'm going to see how much I can get out of it. So I'm going to build this down into the center. I think I'm going to have to load the brush. But let's see what we get, right? Because there, all the learning is in the practice and play. So I'm going to make it wider, like it's pouring out the bottom of the funnel. And it's okay if you don't cover everything. Kind of makes it interesting. Circular motion, not a sweeping motion, okay? Oh, I love that. It's even better than the first time I did it. Love that. So look at now. Do you see how the depth starts to be created? Because we have the first layer that was the yellow drips and some of the little taps and drops. And then we have a stable area where we go in with the dry art crayon and a stencil, because it's the Picasso is here. The art has been made for you. So it's almost like you can't fail. Put that on there and you create that pattern. And you know I like to create interest. Let's look at the layout again with those drips. So I'm going to go in now with a deeper green, load up my paintbrush, and put some little taps and drips on there. So just take your heat gun. I don't have to dry what we did through the stencil brush, but I am going to dry those little drips. And then we're ready to trim this down and start building a layout. I know, that was super quick, right? So I've done all my wet bits. I think now, wouldn't it be fun? This is really pretty, but it needs something that elevates that pattern. And that's where stamping, I find, is magic. So I'm going to load up some of my circle stamps. It's one of my favorite sets here, with some permanent ink, and I'm just going to stamp a pattern. So my tip when you're doing this, because this is almost a given, I am going to put some kind of mixed media background. I'm going to stencil on it. I might use texture with glazes, and then I will use stamps. It's almost like a formula when I'm building layouts. And often with black, I like to add black because it's no different than in my home decor. They say you need one piece of black furniture, ground your room. It's no different. Design is design. So even when it's on a scrapbook page, I find that the black will make my pattern pop. So when you go in here with this, you want to ink up your stamp, and I'm using the dotted background, and I'm looking at my layout so I can see the reference. And I'm going to ink that up. You could do this in color too. It doesn't have to be black, but just something darker. And then I'm going to stamp one off the top here. And even if the whole image, it did stamp with this one, but sometimes I'm stamping and only part of the image stamps. It's okay because it's a background. If it was a word, you'd be a little bit more concerned, and you might want to use a stamp placement tool. But for this one, you can just be random kind of in your placement. And then I'm going to go in and maybe here, it's going to kind of float down the page. I like that. And then let's put one where I know my photo is going to be. Maybe here, but not lined right up with that guy, like either shift it in a bit. So with that now, I'm going to go in. I love this stamp. It is kind of like coffee ring pattern. Circle stamps. Here's another thing. Here's another golden nugget. If you are new to purchasing stamps, buying simple layerable patterns rather than the mouse in the teacup. It's always a reference I use. Mouse in the teacup is great if you're going to make a series of cards or something like Christmas. If it's a Santa and you want to make a whole bunch of Christmas cards, that's great. But if you want bang for your buck in a stamp set, I go in with hearts, stars, circles, butterflies, flowers, and I can never ever have enough butterflies ever. People will laugh. If I could get away with every single one of my paper releases and stamp releases to put some type of butterfly in there, it's almost like Vicki's Where's Waldo. I will put a butterfly in everything because you can never have enough happiness with butterflies and rainbows. So now I'm going to go in with this one and I'm going to layer some circles and move it around too so you don't have just the same circle pattern. Like make those little broken polka dots kind of float in there. And I'm putting it with some of the larger ones and then they can float on their own as well. For this particular layout, you can either use this as a full background or you can trim it. And I'm going to just trim the edges off of it. This is when we get into trimming the top, which I trimmed a little piece of it off. It's still sitting here in the trimmer. Now I'm going to just take a 1/4 inch off of all the edges. It's kind of what I do. If I want that punch of pattern paper in the background, and you'll find because I want my pattern to stay where I want or where I placed it, I'm not just going to cut 1/2 inch off of one side. I go around and I'll cut that 1/4 inch off of all the sides. Now this one might not need much off of it. We'll test it because I did already cut a little bit off of that top off. But it doesn't have to be perfect. You will find that is not something I will ever tell you that your projects need to be as perfect, because perfect is not interesting. So here's what I have to tell you. Some of my favorite outcomes are from oops moments. I love some of the results I have, like when I drop the stamp on the page, because I make mistakes. I might do this all the time, but oh my goodness, you would not be or you would be shocked at how much of a mess I make sometimes, but it's okay because that's where the fun comes. So see now when I lay that down on that green, and this paper's from the Field Notes collection, right? They're all double-sided. You can buy it in the paper pad or in open sheets or whatever. You don't have to buy Vicki Boutin stuff. Use whatever you have on hand. If you like it and you want to get it, that's awesome. But now you're just going to take a tape runner and you're going to tape that down. I'm going to take my mats with some foam squares and I'm going to add it. So this is what I usually do. I will kind of figure out what I want to do placement-wise before I put everything down or commit it with my tape runner. So just kind of positioning that there. And then I put some stickers on here and layer these guys. Here's the other magic thing. Everything looks a little flat right now. Foam squares, 3D foam elements are your friend. It doesn't mean the whole page has to be bubbled up because then you might have concerns with fitting it in your page protector. Sometimes I'll just put one under a corner, and I'm going to show you on the other layout. Let's look at it finished because really this is a pretty simple page. I can just explain what I've done here. So I have all of these lovely thickers that I've added. So this thicker set here, look at, that's all in my handwriting. I'm always super excited over title work and titles made easy. Because if you ask me, Vicki, what is this? What do you struggle with? I could lie and say nothing, I'm perfect. I just do it all right. And that would be a bald-faced lie. I struggle with title work, and it's the one thing I'm often inspired by amazing artists that will layer titles because the magic is all in the layering. So when I design these, I want to make sure they could be used stand on their own, one of a kind, or break up the words. Do you see that they're full of embellishments as well by adding all of the little hearts and the stars? So when I draw it, I will fit every single thing I can get into that size, and they're double-sided. And the other thing we have are chipboard subtitles or little words that you can add in there. So I put all of those elements in together to make a quick and easy mixed media scrapbook page. So I hope you enjoyed that. And if you have any questions, make sure you post them because I'll be coming back and reading and trying to help you so you will give all of this stuff a try. But thanks so much for joining me, and make sure to give mixed media a try because it's art for everyone. Thanks for watching. If you like this video and want to see more from Scrapbook.com, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a message. Happy crafting!